Last month, Warhammer 40,000 saw one of the biggest balance shakeups of 9th edition so far. And now that a brace of competitive events have been completed using these stats, we can take away some impressions about how the game is doing, and what exactly is going on with Arks of Omen. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we're now a couple weeks into the Arks of Omen season for the GT format of Warhammer 40k. The metagame is shaping up, and stats are rolling in about how effective the most recent balance changes to the game have been. So let's dive into some statistics and talk about my biggest takeaways from the data so far. As I have in the past, I'll be referencing Cliff Thomas's incredible 40k stat check visualization. I'll put a link for that in the description. And as always, if you enjoy my 40k content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all that YouTube stuff. You know the drill. You've heard it a billion times. So just do it. I don't know.
Just do it!
Hopping right in with the poster children of the game, let's talk about some Space Marines and how Dark Angels are now the best Space Marine chapter, and in fact, the best army in the entire game. I think we all expected Iron Hands and Salamanders to do well given the changes that were made in the balanced data slate. That specifically includes the ability to retain doctrines for multiple turns, rather than being forced to switch over to the next doctrine in the chain. So, an army can start in Devastator and stay in Devastator indefinitely, or move to Tactical in round 2, and then stay in Tactical for the rest of the game. This made it incredibly powerful for factions who had really good effects that came into the play in the Devastator Doctrine, because you could then utilize those for the entirety of the game rather than only getting them for a single round. Dark Angels are one of these, with some enormous benefits in the Devastator Doctrine, particularly for Ravenwing units. So while we expected a big showing out of the aforementioned chapters, Dark Angels kind of came out of the woodwork and absolutely murdered the rest of the game, including, unfortunately, their brothers in arms, the Blood Angels, and basically prevented their chance of competing at all. Speaking of Blood Angels, the stats right now clearly show that Armor of Contempt is really holding up the 2+ save, non-Storm Shield protected infantry archetype. The units like Sanguinary Guard were really relying on that armor save bonus to keep themselves alive, and without it, they're really struggling to compete. On the other hand, highly technical, mixed company lists bringing large bricks of very efficient Deathwing Terminators, now with that free War Gear upgrade, backed up by Ravenwing units that are able to add some maneuverability that the army never really had before, that are then able to benefit from their Ravenwing Super Doctrine, have surprised everyone by becoming the undisputed best list in 40k. Dark Angels are currently sitting at about a 60% win rate, better than most armies competed in Warzone Nephilim. In fact, it was rare for a faction to break that 60% win rate ceiling, and at the end of Nephilim, almost nothing was above that 55%. Now, speaking of tanky 2+ save models that are wandering up the table in huge bricks, the next question I have to ask about these statistics is, what happened to Custodians? Custodies had an insanely strong first week of the season, putting up a bunch of X and 1 and podium finishes, as well as a couple GT wins. But they've fallen off very hard after the fact. After having virtually all of their nerfs from previous data slates reversed and becoming close to, if not exactly the same as the powerhouse they were upon release, many people, including myself, kind of expected a stronger showing from the Golden Boys. It may be that Space Marines are indeed way too strong and preventing even pre-nerf Custodies from participating, but part of this result could be that Custodies have had the highest play rate of this season so far, meaning that plenty of new or returning players are coming back to or being introduced to the faction and are dropping some games that they won't be a couple weeks down the line when they're more familiar with the faction's mechanics. Custodies right now are sitting kind of at the sweet spot in that Goldilocks zone, right at 50%, and again, with the highest play rate of any faction in the game. My number 3 takeaway is going to be a topic very close to my heart, and it is the wholesale extermination of the Tyranid Menace to the Milky Way galaxy. Fortunately, the forces of the Imperium were victorious. The Tyranid hive fleets have been shattered across the galaxy and no longer pose a threat to the continued existence of the Imperium or the other denizens of the galaxy it inhabits. In the recent data slate, Tyranids obviously got the brunts of nerfs, with enormous points increases across basically the entirety of the faction and the removal or heavy nerfing of a lot of their core mechanics. There was a narrative going around that the Tyranid Codex is deep enough to survive any nerf, but they're currently sitting at a 38% win rate, tied with Blood Angels and second only to Leagues of Votann for the worst army in 40k. Leagues of Votann already being an inflexible army and getting a follow-up points hike in the most recent data slate, so they couldn't take advantage of the new Arks of Omen list composition rules that allowed them to leave sort of deadweight units like Hearthkin warriors at home, makes it understandable that that faction would not be doing so well. But the ability of the Tyranid Codex to adapt to the changing meta was well touted by many members of the community. It will be interesting to see if that is actually the case, and whether the faction was severely hobbled by the changes made in the data slate, or players are just trying to play outdated lists that don't really work anymore in the new format, and there's still room in the army to explore. While it could be that Tyranids are mostly unplayable garbage, it could very easily be that we see their win rate increase gradually as players get more comfortable with the new paradigm of the faction. Last but not least, we'll talk about a boogeyman of the meta, and what's going on with Imperial Guard. Upon release, the Guard Codex was worrying to the community for their extreme damage output and several unbalanced mechanics. I've spoken at length in a recent video about the insane damage output from Khazarkin teams, and the Codex also has some incredible synergies with Forge World units like Basilisk gun carriages, and stackable abilities like Ursula Creed's +1 strength effect that can duplicate themselves onto a single unit. Stack that with solid midboard presence from units like Command Squads with their Ogren Bodyguards and Adelan Rough Riders, and back that up with some of the most efficient shooting in the game from units like Mortar Teams and Leman Russ Battle Tanks, and it seems like Imperial Guard were set up for success. But they just haven't put in those results quite yet. Whether this is due to tournaments disallowing the new codex or curtailing their rules with custom FAQs, since the codex hasn't received an errata to bug fix it yet, and many of those interactions that I just discussed are likely unintended and may be ruled against by individual TOs, is so far unclear. It could also be that Imperial Guard simply just don't function into the metagame, or that players are hesitant to pick them up wholesale, knowing that it's a possibility that a lot of their mechanics may change dramatically in the not-too-distant future. Currently, Astra Militarum are sitting at below a 50% win rate. Exactly what the cause of this low win rate is remains to be seen, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that win rate increase sharply as more players pick up the army. Overall, while the data is still rolling in for Arks of Omen and the sample sizes are relatively small with just a couple weeks of events under the community's belt, Arks of Omen is looking a little unbalanced at this stage. The target of the design team is to put all factions within that 45 to 55% win rate bracket, which they were close to in mid-Nephilim. While things got a little out of whack towards the end of the Nephilim season, especially with mixed factions like Mixed Chaos and Tzeentch armies becoming incredibly effective, the vast majority of factions fell within that 10% win rate bracket, with only a handful of factions and supplemental chapters above or below that range. The initial data for Arks of Omen puts Marine chapters well above the power level of any of the factions at the end of Nephilim. This is additionally distressing given the general overrepresentation that Astartes tends to get within the metagame. Everyone and their uncle has a Space Marine army, and anytime Space Marines are good, they're very excited to trot them out. So should any group of Space Marine chapters prove too powerful, it's likely that they will dominate the game for the foreseeable future. I'm crossing my fingers that we don't see a return to the dark days of late 8th edition or early 9th, where the unbalance and flexibility of a super-powered Marine Codex effectively removes the ability of other factions to compete competitively. I don't know if we're in that same situation, but I do think it's a possibility and worth keeping in mind as we continue to play Arks of Omen events. While I don't think it's bad that Space Marines necessarily are good and hyper-playable, I do think it does get a little oppressive when they are the best faction in the game. And with that, that's all I have to say about Arks of Omen. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks for everyone who supports the channel over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise. YouTube channel members and Twitch subscribers, all you people are great. I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.